Databases are by far the most useful feature in Notion. In this full tutorial, I walk you through every key component so that by the end, you know exactly how to build and use them, even if you're a complete beginner. Hey friends, welcome. In case you're new here, my name is William, and I'm on a mission to help solopreneurs and productivity-driven individuals organize their work and life using Notion. I have been using Notion for over 3 years now, and on this channel I'm trying to share as many of the things that I've learned to help you become familiar with the app as well. Today's video is special because you may or may not know, but I've got an history with databases. They partly inspired the name of the channel, and I use them all the time in my personal life or in the templates that I share. I consider them the holy grail of Notion. Now this video will be a bit different than the usual, where I explain the theory and then put it into practice. Instead here, to avoid making the video incredibly long, I will build a task database and a mini dashboard with you as I explain along, so make sure you stay until the end. Also, to keep it digestible, I will not go over every bit of detail like I did in other videos. However, I guarantee you that by the end of this video, you will know everything you need about Notion databases. So first, what is the database? Notion databases are customizable collections of structured content used to organize information in different ways. They work a bit like spreadsheets, but they support rich content and multiple views like board or calendar, and different properties like tags, dates, or checkboxes. Let's directly start by creating a database. First, we need to go to the sidebar and add a blank new page. Now we already have a choice, which is to either create a full page database or an inline database. So the first option is to create it like any other block by typing /database and selecting inline, and it's now embedded in the current page. But I can either open it as a full page in the top right corner or click the 3 dots next to the block, and then I have the option to turn it into a simple table, which is not a database, or into a page on which I can then click to open a full page database. The other option is to go back to the previous page, and if I make this blank again, it makes pre-made options appear at the bottom of the page. And if I click database, I will have the choice to create an empty full page database or build it with AI, or even choose from existing templates. Let's just choose the first option. So this is what a full page database looks like. As you can see, I can type any text in here. I can just add pages to the spreadsheet. In the top right corner of the page, you can access the global database settings. From here, you can delete the database, lock it to avoid any unwanted modification by you or somebody else if you share it. Customize layout is an option that we'll see later in the video, so make sure you stay until the end. You can also merge the database with a CSV file with the columns that you want to add new entries to the database in bulk. And finally, you can duplicate the database with or without content. I'm going to do this because I will need another database for something later on. It doesn't matter if I choose with or without content because the database is empty anyway. And as you can see, a new database appeared in the sidebar. And by the way, both of these full page databases look like regular pages. Now, before we get into the real stuff, let me show you how to quickly customize your database. Just like any other page, you can add a title, an icon, a cover, but the specificity of databases is that you can also add a description. So let's go over each option. Let's start by adding a title. So like I said, I want to build a task database. Let's just call it test. If I click add icon, I have the choice to either add an emoji, an icon, or upload an image. There is a wide choice of emojis, and you can even add a custom one in the bottom right. Now if I click upload, I can add any image from my computer or one that I copied and pasting it with Ctrl V. And finally, icons are made in Notion, and once you click on one, you can select from 10 colors. So let's just pick one. Now onto the cover, let's click add cover, then change cover. And again, I have the choice between Notion images and other free images, or I can just link a web URL or even upload one of my own pictures. Let's see if I can find something related to productivity. Let's choose this. Now I can go back and reposition the cover to center it better on the cover area. Then click Save Position. Finally, I can click Add Description to explain what the database does, how it works, and I can also apply the basic formatting to it. So bold, colors, adding links. So let me just write something down real quick. Once it's written, you can decide to show or hide it from the interface. Okay, now let's go to the real stuff and see how to add and open database pages. So we have different ways to do it. The most obvious one is to click on the big blue New button in the top right corner, which will create and open the page automatically inside Peak, one of the 3 display modes, as we'll see in a moment. Another way is to go to the sidebar and click on the small plus button to add a page inside. With this option, the page is also automatically opened, but this time in center peak, and it requires to be edited in any way, otherwise it will automatically be deleted if you leave it blank. Finally, you can also add a new page directly from the view, and actually, as we'll see, this depends on the type of view, but from a table view, you just have to click plus new page to add a new entry, and it just adds a new row without opening the page, and then you are automatically prompted to change the name. If you then wish to open the page, you can just hover over the item and click open. Now let's go over what makes database so powerful, which is database properties. So let's keep it simple here. You can add properties from either one of the database pages by clicking add a property, by opening the database settings, then edit properties and new property, or simply by clicking the add property button in the table view. Then you can choose among 21 properties and additional connections. The suggested properties are the same than below, but it's just suggestions that Notion makes depending on what your database is about, and it changes the name automatically as well. So the first box are the essential properties, then the more advanced ones, and lastly, the ones that you cannot modify but are useful to organize the data. I'm just going to add a few relevant properties for a task database like status or date, and I will explain you how they work next. So here I added 4 properties: status, date, person, and multi-select. I can change the property visibility from the database settings and hide the properties that I don't need in this view by clicking the eye icons, but let's keep all of them for now. I can also change the icons and name of each property and add a description to explain how it works. Now I can rearrange them and also resize the columns so that everything fits well. And I can only do that from a table view. Now let's start by describing what the status property does. So this property is used to track the progress, and I can change the options by clicking on the property, then edit property. Here I can click on any option, delete it, set it as default, change its color, or even change its group between to do, in progress, and complete. Doing that will change the color to the default color of the group, which are respectively gray, blue, and green. You can also drag and drop the options between the groups. Finally, you can choose to display the property as a checkbox instead of a set of options, which can be useful for simple to-do lists, for example. However, this only applies to this view, and unlike a simple checkbox property, the sublying options are still here, and so by checking or unchecking the box, it will just ignore the in-progress group and change the status to the last option of the to-do group or the first option of the complete group. Let me give you an example. I will add 2 new options, one in the first group and one in the last. Okay, so I added the waiting option at the beginning of the to-do group and the abandon option at the end of the complete group. And now, if I check the box and open the corresponding page, the status has been updated to abandon and not to done, whereas if I uncheck, the status is then updated to waiting instead of not started. Okay, now let's change the person property. Here it's quite simple. I can edit the property, set the limit as one person, and attribute it by default to the person who created the page. So I won't change anything in this case, and then I can just click on a cell and select a guest or any person in the workspace. So this depends on who you want to share the database with and is more useful for teams. Now, the date property. Let's click on a cell, and here I need to select the date in question, and I can also add an end date to create a period, and I can also include a time that applies to each of the two dates. I can change the date format if I want to display dates in different ways. So I will pick something like relative. It will also change the grouping, which we will see in a moment. Now, depending on where you live, you can also change the time format and the time zone. You can also apply a reminder at different times, and it will send a notification to your workspace. And finally, you can click the clear button to remove the date for this entry. By the way, by adding a reminder, the date will either turn blue if it hasn't been triggered yet, or red once it has been triggered. So let's rename the date deadline and move on with the next property. Now multi-select works a bit like status, but it's easier and is often used as tags. You can add different options by naming them from the property field, and you can add as many as you want to each page cell. So to modify an option, just click the three dots next to the option name, and there you can rename it, change the color, or even delete it. By default, the order of the options is manual, but you can click Edit Property and sort them alphabetically or the reverse, and you can even autofill the options with AI once you've renamed the property to describe it. There we go, I renamed the property context, and now the AI autofill option is available. Now, as the database grows and I add more and more entries, I will end up with a huge amount of scattered nodes, and I need a way to organize them. That's where categorization options are very useful. In Notion, we can filter, sort, and group the items within a database to retrieve them more easily. Let me just add a few entries in this database and show you what I mean. Okay, so I added many pages so that I can show you how to use sort, filters, and groups. If you want, you can also reorganize rows by clicking the 6 dots next to database entries and dragging them elsewhere. Now, let me explain how sorting works. You can sort the database pages using their property values. So to do so, just click the little sort icon next to the settings. Then you can sort by any property in the database. So let's choose deadline, for example. Now I have a little pop-up where I can choose another property if I want to. I can add more properties with which to sort the page in case the deadline is the same and I need more criteria. So I can add status next. Now I can choose to sort it with the highest values or the lowest values at the top and vice versa, but this depends on the property type. So let's see with descending, for example, for a number property, it would be quite obvious. The items would be the highest number at the top and then the lowest at the bottom. For a date, it would be the newest date in the timeline at the top and the oldest at the bottom. And for status, it would be the options in the complete group first and those in the to-do group last. I hope you get how this works. So finally, I can just delete sorts individually by clicking the small cross next to each, or remove the sorting completely by clicking delete sorts. The next important option is grouping, which you can access by clicking the database settings in the top right corner, then group. Here you can choose any property to group the pages by, so for example, status. And this creates groups for each status option that I have. And by default, those that are empty are hidden, but I can change the visibility with the hide empty groups button, or manually click the eye next to each group to hide or show them. Just like we sorted pages before, I actually can sort the groups manually or in an ascending or descending way. And specifically for the status property, I can decide to show the status by group instead of options. And so as you can see, it's much simpler now. There's only the 3 default Notion groups left, so to do, in progress, and complete. And if any of them is empty, then it will be hidden since the Hide Empty Group button is toggled on. I can change the grouping property at the top or remove the grouping altogether at the bottom of the settings. Now if I leave the settings, I can also toggle on or off the visible groups and decide to show an aggregation of all sorts of value concerning the items within the group. So for example, it can count the number of pages or display different dates like the earliest, latest, or a date range. Now let's go on to filters, which are accessible from the small icon next to the sort icon. So like sorts, you can pick any property to filter the database entries by. So let's pick context, for example. And here again, the options you have depend on the property type. But here I can just choose to display only pages that contain at least one tag by switching that to is not empty. I can then add additional filters by clicking plus filter, or click the current filter, then the three dots next to it, and turn it into an advanced filter. Here I can add filter rules or even groups, which are basically nested rules, and use conditional logic to filter the data. So let's pick deadline this time. I can switch between and or conditions to decide if I want both rules to match or just one to apply the filter. So let's skip and. Then I have several options to filter the date, but for example, I'm going to pick is relative to today, which opens up even more sub options. I can pick whether the filter applies to the start date or to the end date, which only matters if I turn the deadline into a period, as we've seen before. Otherwise, both start date and end dates are the same. So let's put end date, and then that the deadline must be within the next 2 months. And finally, I can delete the filter at the bottom if needed. And so now, only the pages that have at least one tag and whose deadline is within the next 2 months are visible. That brings me to another crucial database feature related to filters and to groups, which is the pre-filling of cells. It means that there is a way to force properties to take a certain value as soon as you create them. So now that we've applied filters, let's untoggle the to-do group and click on the new page button from this group. And as you can see, the deadline and context properties are pre-filled, and that's because to be added in the current view, they need to comply with the filters, and so the context cannot be empty, so it is filled automatically with the first option of the multi-select property, and the deadline has to be within the next 2 months. So actually by default, it fills it with the earliest date that meets this condition, which is today. It's also interesting to play with groups because now if I create a new page from the complete group on top of the 2 other properties, the status will also be set to complete, and so the box is checked. And if I move a page from one group to another, the status will also change automatically. Now let's move on to another very important part of Notion databases. So I kept mentioning views in this video, but what exactly are database views? How many are there? How to create them? How to use them? So to this day, there are officially 8 ways to visualize your content within a database: the table, board, timeline, calendar, list, gallery, chart, and feed. There are also forms, which are not a real view but are connected to databases to manage the information that they gather. Chart and feed are actually not part of the main 6 database views. Charts are a bit more complex and also only for Plus Plan users. And feed is a new feature that displays full pages one after the other, but has very limited application so far, like announcements, posts, or changelogs. So to create a new view, you just have to click the plus button at the top left of your database and then select a view. Let's break each one down. The view that we are currently in is called a table view. So tables allow you to see your database pages as rows with every property represented by a column. By clicking each column, you have different options for the property: filter, sort, and group, like we've seen before, but also calculate all sorts of things, counting the number of pages, the percentage of empty cells, a date range, for example. You can also freeze the column, meaning that if you scroll right, all the columns on the left side will stick to the screen and stay visible. You can wrap the text of the cell to show the content on multiple lines. You can hide properties. You can insert a property left or right of the column. And finally, you can duplicate or delete the property. Now, if I go to the database settings and layout, I have another bunch of options. So some of them are shared for most views. So let's go over them quickly. Show vertical lines is just to hide or show the lines separating the columns. Show page icon allows you to show or hide the page icon visible next to their name in each row. Wrap all columns is the same feature that we've seen before to show the content of cells on multiple lines, but is applied to all columns at the same time. Open pages in allows you to change the way pages are opened. So by default, it's side peek for the table view, but is different in other views. And finally, the load limit is only visible here because I enabled grouping, and that's used to set a limit number of pages that can be displayed in the view and in each group at once. The next view I want to show you is the board view. So let's create one. Its specificity is that it is pre-grouped by a property which you can pick, and you can choose another property to add subgroups to organize the pages kind of on two layers. Then the pages are actually shown as cards, not as rows like in the table view, for which you can change the size from small, medium to large, or even the card preview, either to show the page cover, the page content, or cover or images contained in a files and media property. A nice aesthetic feature is that you can also color columns automatically depending on your property options colors. As you can see now, like the table view, the default way pages are opened in this view is also side peek. So the purpose of this view is to drag pages across the different property options, so it can be very useful for the task database, for example, to see and update the status of each task easily. Let's add a gallery view now. It's a bit similar to the board view in some ways because it also functions with cards. So this view is useful for highlighting images. Like in board view, you can change the card size from small to large, and the card preview to show the page cover, the page content, or any images or covers contained in a files and media property. Now let's add a list view. Lists are a very clean, minimal layout for your database items. So the idea with this view is to go to the settings, sort, filter, and group the data as we like, and click property visibility to toggle on or off all properties that we do or don't need. We can also rearrange how they show up by dragging them up or down, and the same can be done for the pages. Now let's move on to the two views that are based on date properties, starting off with calendar. First, I can choose the date property by which to show the calendar, so deadline in my case. Then by default, the calendar is shown as a month, but it can also be changed to a weekly view. I can decide to show the weekends or not. And finally, all the pages appear in their dedicated cells, and I can then obviously show more properties to customize the views a bit more. Now let's create the second date-based view, which is the timeline view. Like the board view, it's very useful for projects, so you can see when your tasks and milestones are happening and how long they take to complete. Again, I can choose the date property by which to show the timeline. Then I can decide to show the actual table view next to the timeline. Then I treat it like a standalone view concerning the properties that I decide to show. So combining these two views can be quite useful for editing. And now if I click out, the cool thing about the timeline view is, well, the timeline itself. So first we can adjust the timescale to change the full period that is shown on screen. In the top right corner, just click on month, then change between hours, days, weeks, month, quarters, or even years. And so now if we're lost somewhere into the past or way into the future, we can just click today at the top right to snap back to the current day, or use the arrows to move it manually. So to resize a task, You just have to hover over either end of a page and drag to adjust how long it lasts. You'll then see the new date update in real time. It's also possible to reorder things by dragging items up or down, left or right, which will automatically change their start and end dates. And to create a new page, you can click anywhere at the bottom of the timeline and it will apply dates automatically. If the table is open, you can also drag the handle on the left side of the row and also add a new page at the bottom. Okay, now let's add the most recent view, which is feed view. This view displays your pages on top of each other, but as cards, a bit like the gallery view, but you can actually show more text and documents directly without having to open the page. It's the only view that allows you to set a page load limit without grouping, because you actually can't use grouping in this view. Then, since it's a view made mostly for posts and announcements, you can decide to show the author or not. Then you can add comments and see the content contained in the pages, including rich text and images directly from here. And last but not least, let's create a chart view, which is clearly different from the others. So if you are on the free plan, you are unfortunately limited to creating one chart per workspace. So there are 4 types of charts: vertical bar, horizontal bar, line, and donut. The settings for the first 3 options are almost the same, except that the X and Y axis are reversed in the horizontal and vertical bar charts. Okay, so to keep it simple, you basically decide what property you want to show on both axes. On the Y axis, you can count the number of pages that are in different categories of the property that you've selected. In the X axis, just like other views, you can filter, sort, and group the data. You can decide to omit the 0 values for the X axis and change the range for the Y axis, so putting in a different minimum and maximum value. Next, you can go on to the styling options, starting with changing the set of colors. Then you can choose the height of the chart, where you want the grid lines to appear, if any, the axis names, if any, change the data labels, and add captions. And finally, you can zoom on the data by clicking on the associated section of the graph. Okay, now that we've seen the database views, let's get into the more advanced database properties, starting with relations and rollups. These 2 properties work together to connect databases, view and aggregate info from one database to another. So this is where we are going to use the other database that I duplicated earlier and that I renamed projects. So to create a relation, just like any property, I just need to click on the plus add property button, then select relation, and it automatically opens up a window where I can choose the database I want to link it to, including the current one. So let's choose projects. Then I can decide to limit the number of pages to 1 or no limit. Make it a 2-way relation to be able to edit the relation from the other database. So I'm going to toggle that on. And now I can rename the mirror property in the other database, but this is optional. So now if I go back and I click the property cells, I can link or create pages in the other database. So for now it's empty, so I can't link any. So let's just create one from here, call it project 1, add new project 1, and if I click on it now, it will open the page in the other database. So I can do this back and forth since I created kind of a 2-way bridge between the 2. If I click the 3 dots in the top right corner of the relation, I can then show specific properties from the related page by clicking the eyes or dragging the properties that I want to show into the visible section. Okay, so that's it for the relation. Now let's create a rollup. So it's the same process, add property, then select rollup. Now if I click on the cell, I have to select an existing relation from the current database. Then in the second field, I can choose any property of the other database to pull its data on this one. So in this case, I haven't created any property in the other database, so I'm just going to leave it as name. And finally, the third field is where I can choose what to calculate with the aggregated property. and the options depend on the type of property that you pull. So in this case, I can only show the original pages, the unique values only, count how many pages there are, or even display percentages. Okay, so the next advanced property that I want to show you is formulas. To create and edit a formula, again, I will add a new property, formula, and then click a cell to open the formula editor. So the editor helps you build formulas with visual feedback, a property function list on the left, and detailed usage tips on the right. So formulas in Notion are made from properties, so the columns in your database, built-ins, which are operators and booleans like false or and, and functions, so logic or math operations like replace, sum, or every. Then the output can be of different return types, from text to number or even date. There are basically an infinite number of formulas that you can create. So in this case, I'm just going to show you an example using some properties and functions that are already created. Basically, there are two parts to the formula that I just added. First, if the deadline property is empty for this row, then it will display an empty cell. And if it is not empty, then it will display the text days left. Then calculate the number of days between the deadline and now using the date between and now functions, combined with the days parameter to mention that we want days and not any other measurement. Finally, it will apply a bold and red styling on the number with the style function and B for bold and red parameters. So actually that's it for formulas. Even though there are a ton more elaborate examples that I could show you, I think you get the point. Now let's move on to the last advanced database property, which is buttons. So for the most part, they work the same way as regular buttons, in a sense that they are used to automate specific actions with one click. So let's add a new property, then click button. And now each row is filled with the same button used to trigger the automation. But if I want to edit it, I need to click on the property column, then edit automation. I can rename it at the top. Let's call it push deadline. Then add one or more actions to the sequence that trigger in order. So I can choose from several options, edit a property value in this database, add a new page to a database, edit one or multiple pages in a database, send a notification, ask a confirmation, open a specific Notion page, and even define variables. Now, paid plan users can also send mails, webhooks, or Slack notifications. So let's add a few actions, starting with show confirmation, so that whenever I click the button, it will ask me to confirm whether or not I really want to trigger the automation. I can collapse it because I don't need to see it when it's created. Then let's click add action below. Now let's declare a variable that takes the value of the current deadline and adds 3 days to it. Let's first add a mention, so this page's deadline. Let's edit it as a formula. Remove this part. Instead use the function date add, put 3 days and days as the unit, then save. And finally, I can add another action to edit the deadline property and select variable 1 as the value to replace. And so that's it for the automation. Let's just rename the button add 3 days to deadline and then try to trigger the automation for a page. As you can see, I have to accept the confirmation, and if I click continue, then 3 days are automatically added to the deadline of this page only. And since we're in automations now, let me give a quick word about database automations, which are a plus point feature and work basically the same way as database buttons concerning the actions. The main difference is that you can use other triggers than clicking a button, and you can select the views in which the automation applies. Okay, that's it for advanced properties. Now I'm going to go back to the timeline view, and we're going to dive in other advanced features, which are sub-items and dependencies. Actually, these two features are not limited to this view only. but are mainly used for advanced project management and are best seen from the timeline in general. So first, sub-items allow you to break down a task into smaller actionable steps. So to enable them, just go to the database settings, click More Settings, then Sub-items, and turn on Sub-items. If I go back to it, I can also change how parent and child tasks show. So by default, they are nested in a toggle, but depending on my needs, I can also display parents only. Then an arrow appears with the number of child tasks next to it. I can show a flattened list where both parent and child items appear next to each other, and the child pages are linked to the parent page with its name written next to them as well. And finally, if I click Disabled, it does not show the parent page's name anymore next to the child item. Now the last option is to go to the advanced settings, and then from here I can choose the relation property that represents the sub-items, so you can switch the parent and child items. And if you want to revert back to normal, just click Turn off sub-items. Now I can add sub-items that are nested in their parent page with different names, dates, and property values, and I can use the toggle to decide to show them or not. So now let's move on to dependencies, which let you indicate which tasks rely on others. To enable them, it's the same process. Open database settings, go to More Settings, and this time click Dependencies. We can choose how we want dates to shift. So basically, if I move a page, how the other pages will behave. There are three choices. By default, the dates change only when pages are overlapping. The other option is to maintain the time gap. So if I change a deadline, all pages will move at the same time. Finally, I can decide to not shift at all, but this can cause conflicts and overlapping of dates. So I'm just going to choose the first option. Then there is also an optional setting to avoid starting and ending tasks on weekends. And finally, you can just click on Turn Dependencies to activate the feature. Now, if I go back to the dependencies settings, I will have different options. So the last option is to go to the advanced settings. And then from here, I can choose the relation property that represents the items that are blocked. So again, you can switch the pages blocked by and blocking each other. Then let's go to the timeline view, and you will notice that the pages that are blocking or blocked by other pages are linked by a yellow arrow on the timeline view, and you can choose to show or hide these dependencies in the view by clicking Hide Dependencies in View. Okay, so for this next part, I'm going to turn the database into a task database. So now you might be thinking, but wasn't it already a task database? I had named the database tasks, yes, but there is an actual task database feature in Notion. It allows you to see all your tasks across multiple databases in your personal home. To enable this function, the access path is the same than before, so database settings, more settings, and then turn into tasks. Now I need to pick three properties, one representing the assignee, one representing the status, and one representing the due date. So in my case, it's already pre-filled, so I will just click Turn into Task Database. Now all new items in the database are automatically called new tasks, and the same goes for sub-items that are called sub-tasks. So I can not only access tasks from my personal home now, but I also have the option to create sprints, which is used to tackle a group of tasks in a recurring set amount of time. Okay, now I want to tell you about another cool feature called database templates, especially useful when databases contain the same types of pages created over and over again, because they let you define and replicate certain page structures with just one click. So you might have noticed this small arrow next to the new button in the top right corner of your database. And so if I click on it, I can create a reusable page template for this database. So it opens the page template in question, and you can notice that it also contains all the properties that we've added previously. Any modification I do in this page either to the title, cover, icon, settings, properties, and even the page content will be replicated on any page based on this template. For example, let's add a title, a page cover, and an emoji. Then I can add tags to the context property and set the deadline to today. So as you can see, these blue options are specific to page templates because they're based on a condition, and the real value will depend on when a page using this template is created. Also, it does not trigger the formula because no real date is applied. The other option is now instead of today, which also adds the time when duplicated, even if I don't click include time. Now the person property can also be set to person who duplicated page. And finally, let's change the status to in progress just for the example. Next, I can also add any type of blocks using the page content and it will be replicated. So let's just write some example text. And finally, let's click the page settings in the top right corner, and anything I change will be set as default for the next pages. So let's change the font to serif, select small text, full width, and also remove the side table of contents. So let's close this page, and before testing, we need to go back to the database template settings, click on the three dots next to the template, and set it as default for all views in tasks. This way, whenever I create a new page in any view of this database, this template will be used. Now, I don't know if you remember, but earlier I told you about the forced pre-filling of property values due to filters and groups. So this feature still works alongside database templates, and it can actually be a useful combo, but in some cases, the forcing feature will override the templates. For example, let's click on plus new task from the group called complete. And so as you can see, the status is set as done, and the page is still in the associated group and not in the group called in progress as we have set in the database template. However, the other properties have been set according to the template, especially the context tags, not to mention the name and emoji as well. Now let's open the page. As you can see, the cover is here and the text with the styling as well. So this worked perfectly, and you might have briefly noticed one last feature about page templates that I haven't yet told you about. Let me go back to the template settings. So let's click the three dots to edit, and here, as you can see, apart from editing, deleting, or duplicating the template, because yes, we can add more than one, well, there is also a repeat function which will create a copy of a template in your database however often you like. For example, let's pick week, select every 2 weeks on Tuesdays and Fridays, starting on the 1st of September, and that stops after, let's say, a number of runs, 5 runs. Then click save. Now you can see the blue arrow icon that tells that starting from September 1st, a new page using this template will be automatically created bi-weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays during 5 iterations. And if I click on edit this template, this new repetition setting is also displayed at the top of the page and can also be modified from here. And that's all you need to know about database templates. Okay, now we are approaching the end of this course and you're still here, so first congrats and thank you. But also you don't want to leave now because I'm going to show you a game-changing feature called layouts. So we've built this page, added properties, set a template, but it kind of still looks ugly and messy. I can at least drag and drop properties to reorganize them and change the visibility, but that's not much. Instead, what I will do, either from the settings in the top right corner or just above the title, is click Customize Layout. So currently I'm previewing the page template, but at the top I can switch to any other page with a name in the database. So this is the layout builder. It is split into different sections. The left side with the heading and the property group. Next to it is the side panel with details that you can show or hide in your pages. And on the right, you've got the menu to edit the different sections. So let me walk you through the different parts and explain how and why this feature can make this page look much better. So basically, in the heading, I can choose to pin some properties that I always want to see at first. So let's pin the button, for example. Now I will also toggle off property labels and hide backlinks to make it cleaner. Next up is the property group, from where I can add new properties and show or hide those that are already there. I can also add collapsible sections to group the properties together and rename them. So let's hide all the subtasks and dependencies relations first. And then instead of leaving all the properties together within the group, I can just add them to the layout by clicking Add to Layout. So this will create standalone modules for each of them. Now, actually, the property group only contains 4 hidden properties. There's no point leaving it in the main page. So let's move it to the side panel. The rollup and formula properties are also not very useful in this view, so let's move them as well. And so now if I hide the sidebar, we have already a much cleaner layout, but we can improve it even more. Let's first reorganize the properties. So the deadline at the top, then the person, the status, the context, and finally the project's relation. Some property types have different display settings in the layout builder and others don't. In this case, I can change the person property to a large display instead of a compact one to make it more visible. And finally, relation properties get a special treatment. So you see, if I click on most properties 3 dots on the right side, I can move the module up or down to the side panel, put the property back to the property group, or even delete it. But for relations, there is an additional option, which is advanced, convert to relations group. Now the relations can all be grouped together and shown in 2 different ways, which are either page section by default or minimal, which basically only displays the number of pages linked with this relation. And finally, I'm going to show you the last feature of Notion layout, which is really cool. Let's open the page settings in the top left corner. Here, I will hide the inline comments and the page discussions, which are the comments at the bottom of the page. Then if I want, I can show or hide property icons and set all the pages in the database as full width. But the most important part is at the top, where I will switch the structure from simple to tab. By default, it will create my first tab called Content, which I can rename, that contains the main page and properties that we've been setting up in this video. But what we want to do is click the plus button to add a new tab. And now there's 2 choices. Either display a view of a database which is linked to the current one, or link it to any database in the workspace, even if it's completely unrelated to the current database. I'm just going to choose Project, and it creates a new tab with the project's database. The specificity of views in tabs when you've chosen the first option, so from a database which is actually related to the current one, is that you may notice that the filter button is already blue. That's because this view is already pre-filtered to show only pages linked to the one that I'm currently previewing. So what this means is that anytime I will create a page in this database, it will apply the tab structure to it, and the new view will filter only the pages linked to the one that I just created. So if I were to preview another page, now the view is empty because the relation property is empty as well. And that's it. Let's click Apply to all pages in the top right corner to validate the changes. So let's go back to the previous page. Now, as you can see, we've got our 2 tabs, and the main content looks much cleaner than before, with no unnecessary property on display, but I can still click the View Details button at the top to show the side panel if needed. And now we've got our beautiful database, which is pretty much finished. Actually, we've seen about 99% of database features now, so well done to us. But I will end this course by showing you how you can use a database that you've created in your workspace by adding linked views in pages and dashboards. First, I will go to the sidebar and add a new page. Then I'll click on the page and click Linked, select Linked View of Database, and then just select my task database. Now I can choose any view from the ones that we have created before, or just build a new one of the same type. So let's create a new list view. And now I have this new linked view, which appears in a different way in the sidebar because it's called by default view of tasks. And it can actually contain other subviews like table or any of the 8 types that we have seen previously. The cool part is that any modification that I make to this view, so I can change the layout, display other properties, filter, sort, group, or even rename it and change the icon, well, it won't affect the other views in the original database. And so finally, what's so cool about this is that you can create as many views as you want in your workspace with the same database. Okay, that's it. We've covered pretty much everything there is to know about databases in this video, from properties to views to templates to layout. Hopefully you've learned a ton of useful stuff. I try to find the good balance between making the course too complex or too shallow. Feel free to replay some parts and follow along, and please let me know in the comments what you thought of it. Thanks. Hey friends, I hope you got value from this video. Please like it if you did. If you want to take your Notion setup even further, head over to thenotionbase.com to find the best free and premium Notion templates in the game. And if you're tired of losing your notes, jumping from one productivity tool to another, having way too many apps cluttering your phone, and you're actually looking for a centralized all-in-one plug-and-play system to organize your entire life using Notion, let me introduce you to the ultimate Life OS. It is the full bundle of all premium templates I've ever created, designed as 7 mini apps working together in one powerful, easy-to-use system. I've spent over 500 hours building it and filling all the databases so you don't have to, saving you hundreds of hours of trial and error trying to build your own. You will also get world-class tutorials and support with lifetime updates as the system continues to evolve alongside Notion. And since you've watched this far, as a thank you, you can get $50 off the already discounted bundle price. And by the way, it's completely risk-free for 90 days. If you don't love it, just send me an email and you can call me crazy, but I'll not only refund you, but also send you an extra 10% as a thank you for giving it a try. Everything is linked down below. And if you have any questions about Notion, drop them in the comments. I read everything and I might choose your question for a future video. And of course, if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Until then, keep notioning and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.